Just see. All right, we have about 7 o'clock, and let's get started tonight. My name is Dr. Rob Voss, and I'm going to talk about was Columbus a racist and sex slaver. This is part of Occupied Volk. An Occupied Volk series was brought together by several of us historians over the summer, thinking about the situation in the United States when it came to race, when it came to ethnicity, the struggles that the United States has been facing, then how do we deal with it and how do we talk about it? So what I'm going to talk about tonight is stuff that I wouldn't normally talk about in class. It's not a lecture that I would give in class. It's not necessarily the right fit. However, what I'm going to talk about is absolutely essential, I think, to understanding who we are and the origins of the United States and origins of this other world. Maybe not the new world, but an other world. So let's get started. So our purpose. So think about what we do for Occupy Volk. We need to address this uncomfortable past. This is what we do as historians. We have to talk about the real past. We have to talk about the truth. Whether that makes a president comfortable or not doesn't really matter. We have to talk about what happened. And we have to understand our past. When we understand our past and we study our past, then we can understand our present and we can make the future better. That's what we do as historians. And thinking about that, this is what's motivates me as a historian, motivates me to talk about what I'm going to talk about tonight. And truth is our object, even if it's uncomfortable. W.B. Du Bois wrote, "We have too often a deliberate attempt so to change the facts of history that the story will make pleasant reading for Americans." I'll say that one again. We have too often a deliberate attempt so to change the facts of history that the story will make pleasant reading for Americans. We don't get to change the facts of history. We need to understand our facts of history so we can move forward from this and not make the same bad mistakes again. So to get into this guy, I'm going to talk about Columbus. So Columbus, well, it's not really Christopher Columbus. He has possibly a variety of different names. We don't really know his given name. We're not sure of that at all. He called himself this, Cristoforo Colomb. He was Genoese. He's from the Republic of Genoa, not Italy. Genoa didn't become part of Italy until 1797, which that makes it a little bit interesting. He was a weaver's, the Republic of Genoa. It's an important place in the Mediterranean, northern Italy. Genoa, the Republic of Genoa was its own kind of independent state. It was important so that it created colonies. They started new cities around the Mediterranean. And in Genoa, one thing that's really important for American history is they practiced chattel slavery. Slavery was part of Genoa in the 1400s. Throughout 1400s, the Genoese practiced slavery. So Columbus was part of this slave-owning world. Now, we don't know his own slavery experience yet. We'll get there, right? He was a weaver's son. And as a weaver's son, he was born into being a merchant. Weavers were merchants as much as they were weavers. He was also, of course, a sailor. And this is where where we get into Columbus's history. He was a very well-accomplished sailor. He hit the open ocean at 14, which is crazy young, which it was a middle schooler, right? A freshman in high school equivalent. He sailed all over the Mediterranean. He sailed as far out of the Mediterranean up to Iceland once. He was shipwrecked several times. One of those shipwrecks, he found himself in the open ocean about 3 miles off the coast of Portugal, and he swam back to Portugal hanging onto an oar. Crazy experiences. He possibly was a leader of a pirate gang, but we're not really sure of that. The rumors on that one don't really lend themselves to credibility. He was supposed to be only 21 years old when he was a pirate, and that's pretty young to be a pirate, at least in the Mediterranean. Nonetheless, he was an accomplished sailor. We don't know if he had formal education. We know eventually he learned to read. We know he learned to write. We also know that he was kind of bad at math, but we'll get there. So Columbus, why does Columbus matter? Why are we talking about Columbus? Well, it's this time of year. It's Columbus Day, right? And Columbus Day being celebrated on Monday, this is an appropriate thing to talk about. And why do we even have a Columbus Day? I mean, Columbus, okay, fine, he sails. And I think that we kind of expect the United States to be celebrating Columbus Day, but that's not always the case. See, in the late 1800s, from 1800 to 1924, you have this influx in the United States of Italian immigrants. Just huge numbers of Italians coming into the United States. All right, just like many other people from Southern and Eastern Europe coming into the US. But what these Italians faced is they faced denigration and racism throughout their experience in the United States. The racism was strong, which is kind of weird because I think today there would be an association with Italians of being white. And yet in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, Italians were considered something else. And so they were facing racism. And in an attempt to battle this racism, depicted here in one of the Pluck cartoons, where you have Uncle Sam is standing on this piece of paper where it points out the mafia in New Orleans being the Italian mafia, the anarchists in Chicago, the socialists in New York, the dirty immigrants coming in, and the Americans are complaining, right? The English convict, Italian vagabond, others as well. So facing this racism, facing this denigration, one of the terrible things that happens is in 1891, facing this increase in immigration in 1891 in New Orleans, the police chief is murdered. That happens. However, who's to blame for this? And the city of New Orleans decides that it is the Sicilians, the Italian immigrants, who are to blame for this. 100 Sicilians were rounded up by the police and citizens and thrown into jail. 100 people, okay? 19 of them were put on trial, all right? Of those 19, there was not enough evidence to convict anyone. So 19 were put on trial, they were found not guilty. The mob of 10,000 people stormed the jail, pulled out 11 of them from the jail, and lynched them. It's the largest mass lynching in US history, not of African Americans, but of Italians. This is 1891. 1892, possibly in response to this, President Benjamin Harrison steps in and validates Italians. See, these Italians are trying to be recognized as having value and not the gangsters, not the mafioso. And so as an attempt to be recognized, Benjamin Harrison declares Columbus Day. There's an attempt to rediscover Columbus as Italian, because of course by now Genoa was part of Italy, and therefore Columbus was Italian, therefore he was a good guy, right? And then Italians are good guys, and they should be revered. So this attempt to rediscover Columbus as Italian was pushed by the Knights of Columbus, Catholic order that really pushed for Italian identity, valuing Italian identity. So 1892, Benjamin Harrison issues a proclamation observing the first Columbus Day nationally. It starts becoming a holiday in 1907 in various states. Colorado's the first one. New York follows in 1909. Eventually, it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt who declares October 12th a national holiday. Okay, and yet this idea of the holiday, there's pushback on this. There's pushback on why do we recognize this as a holiday? Because Columbus, while discovering the New World, although he never, well, I'll get to that. While discovering the New World, he is loaded with problems. He is loaded with problems. So let's get into this history of Columbus, his origins. So why in the world are they even sailing out from Europe? Why even leave Europe? And this goes back to the Iberian Peninsula. Getting back to the Iberian Peninsula, the edge, the peninsula of peninsulas, the edge of Europe. And on the edge of Europe, you have Portugal, right on the very edge. Portugal is a seafaring country, and it had been basically from its beginnings. People were facing the ocean, and they're trying to get off of the coast of Europe, and they do. Eventually, in the 1400s, they establish a school at Sagre. And Sagre is a different experience because what happens at Sagre, mariners start sharing information with each other. Up until this point, if you were a sailor, you didn't talk to other sailors. If you had a chart or a map of somewhere, you kept it private. You didn't tell others because possibly your map was a map to riches and you want your riches for yourself. Prince Henry the Navigator and others in Portugal changed this by pushing out this school at Sagre. They start sharing information. They start getting these merchants to talk to each other, these sailors to talk to each other. So you have this school at Sagre. This helps to reinforce the push for riches and Christianity. Trying to spread both, trying to find riches and spread Christianity. Now, the idea of spreading Christianity isn't necessarily a missionary impulse to convert souls. It might have been more of a cultural impulse, but nonetheless, this is the language that was used. So finding riches and spreading Christianity. And Sagre makes this possible, Portugal makes this possible because they have technology. And there's some very specific technology that shows up in Portugal that doesn't show up in other places. So these combination of technologies show up here, like the cannon, right? Putting this large gun that's reusable on board a ship, that makes it viable to be more seafaring. Then you add in there the compass, which shows up in about 1100. Add that, the compass allows you obviously to tell which direction you're going. But just telling which direction you're going on an open ocean might not be all that valuable. You need to know where you're at. And so you have an astrolabe that helps you with that. Astrolabe helps you figure out your latitude. And then throw in there a new type of boat, new type of ship, which is the caravel. What's different about the caravel is that it's square rigged and it has lateen sails as well, triangular sails as well. So they can sail against the wind. You can zigzag in a zigzag motion. You can sail against the wind, tacking against the wind. So all of these things come together in Portugal, and then throw in there Ptolemy's Geographia, an understanding of the world, the geography of the world. Now, Ptolemy did not sail outside, did not have an understanding of the world outside the Mediterranean, and yet Columbus studies the Geographia. He knows it. He's learning from it. He's trying to figure out the world. So here we have Columbus, right? These origins. So you have this technology that shows up here, right? The cannon, compass, astrolabe. That's all well and good. But you have to have something else. And that something else happens to be race. And this is where it shows up kind of differently. See, in Portugal, they, in 1444, started collecting slaves. And Prince Henry the Navigator started collecting slaves. And they tried to justify his actions. And so out of this, they actually in Portugal invent race. And this is the crazy thing. It's not that people weren't racist before this. Let's be really clear. But this is where they write it down for the first time. In 1453, you have a text called the Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea by Gomez Yanez de Zurara. He was commissioned. He was told to write a history. This is following the conquest of this little spot in Morocco. This tiny dot just across the Iberian Peninsula. It's a little tiny city. It's an independent city today. The city of Ceuta in Morocco. City of Ceuta was conquered by Prince Henry the Navigator, and they're trying to justify this. And so what ends up happening is that Zurara justifies Prince Henry's African slave trading. He tries to say, this is why Prince Henry took those slaves. What he sees, what he finds, is that what if slavery could be used, or we could justify slavery based on a missionary zeal? We're Catholic, they're not, therefore we can enslave them. And over time, they'll become Catholic or Christian in their terminology. And so there's a missionary expedition, which is really twisted, at least from a theological standpoint. So they framed African slave trading as a missionary expedition. And the slaves that were taken, the people that were taken in Ceuta, were of all different nationalities, all different points on the Mediterranean, because this little spot is where everybody's coming from, coming to, I should say, throughout Africa. And yet, despite all the different colorations of the slaves, Zurara lumps them together, and this is that origin of racism. He lumps them together and says, they are inferior, therefore we can enslave them. All the other races lumped together, called inferior, therefore we can enslave them. Now, this is the thing about books, and I talk about this in some of my classes, in my infotech and culture class. When you write something down versus talking about it, when you write something down, it sticks around, and it sticks around longer than you think it will. That's definitely the case here. Zurara dies in something like 1474, and yet his book sticks around in multiple languages for the next about 150 years, where people are eating up the ideas that he wrote down to invent race. All right, Portugal, inventing race. So why does Columbus go anywhere else? Well, it's not necessarily just about racism, but that is a big motivator. Columbus is thinking about that sea. What's out there? And what happens is he has, there's lots of rumor about something else over the ocean, something else across that Atlantic. But they didn't know it was Atlantic. They only thought it was the ocean because they didn't know of any other ocean. There was a sea, the Mediterranean Sea, and an ocean. And there was a lot of debris showing up. Debris showing up in Portugal, washing ashore on islands. Like some crazy things. These ideas get stuck in people's heads and just kind of stay there. For example, for Columbus, he discovered or heard of a rumor of a large stick, a large plank possibly, that had very intricate carvings all over it. He's like, where is this coming from? Why did it show up here? It came over the ocean. Where did it come from? There's other debris showing up. There's rumors and rumors and rumors of something else out there. When he was on that expedition that ended up in Iceland, he thought he saw something else. He thought he saw another land. It might have been Greenland, but he never reached it. And so he was like, there's something else out there. Rumors and rumors. And this starts motivating him. Plus, you get this guy. This is Marco Polo. Marco Polo had walked overland, gone to China about 200 years before. But the rumors and the discussion and the conversation about Marco Polo never left Europe. Marco Polo talked to the Great Khan, and he spoke of these places, Cipango and Kinsei. Cipango being the name for Japan, and Kinsei being the name for one of the cities in China. Marco Polo was all about wealth, and this was a big motivator because getting money made all the difference. While Marco Polo is in his mind, Columbus starts talking to somebody else, and the person he talks to is this guy named Master Paolo. Master Paolo was a Florentine physician who caught Columbus's ear. Florentine physician in the court in Portugal, and he gave Columbus lots and lots of tales of China, of all of the cities covered in gold, the buildings coated in gold, the gems on the streets, which just obviously wasn't true. But it was definitely enough, based on these rumors and rumors and rumors, that you could just make money, right? You could get these riches by simply going to this other land. Now, the other thing that Master Polo said is that you don't have to walk overland to get to China. He said to Columbus, he says, you could just go across the sea. There's nothing in the way. You just sail across an ocean. You're a good sailor. Just sail out there, and eventually you'll get to Cipango. You'll eventually get to the places of the Great Khan, who, of course, 200 years prior was there, but obviously 200 years later wouldn't be. And Columbus listens to this and hears it, and it sticks with him. So these tales of gold and silver and marble and spices and all of these things gets Columbus moving. So Columbus starts looking for a way to go. And so in 1488, he starts asking for financing. He asks courts to pay for his trip. He goes to Ferdinand and Isabella. And Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain reject him. 1488. But something happens in this discussion, and we don't know exactly what. We know that Isabella liked Columbus. Now, there's a lot of questions. Did she, like Columbus, right? Maybe. There's a lot of that stuff going on in the courts. As I've been studying about this and preparing for this talk, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of that going on. Okay, possibly. We know that he's rejected in 1488. We know that he leaves Ferdinand and Isabella, goes to the Portuguese court, and he's rejected by them. And in Portugal, he said he's got some crazy ideas, but his math is wrong. And Columbus is like, and that was a rejection, but they didn't say, hey, try your math again. They just rejected him and then talked about it behind his back, right? However, things change. And in 1492, you have the Reconquista. In 1492, the Spanish succeed in kicking the Moors out of Spain. They finally conquer all of the Muslim cities in Spain and kick the Moors out. They also kick the Jews out, and that's for another discussion for another day. The Reconquista. This opens up the treasury for Ferdinand and Isabella, because all of a sudden they don't have to pay soldiers to be fighting a war. And now it opens up the checkbook. It also opens up the people. Now you have people who don't have to fight, the men who don't have to fight. So instead of going back to them, as soon as the Reconquista happens, Isabella goes after Columbus. She seeks him out. He had been rejected. He was walking away, quite literally several miles away, had been rejected. She asks for him, brings him back. He runs back literally to the court, and she says, I have your money for you. You get 3 ships. And Columbus says, perfect. And he takes her up on the offer. Because, of course, Columbus believes that this is going to be a short journey from east to west, to the east via the west. The reason he thought it was a short journey is because it's math, and he did his math wrong. And I can fully identify with this as a historian. I'm a historian, not a mathematician, but this is what happens, all right? So this is what he did. Columbus based his idea on this guy, Alfraganus. And he wrote a way, he talked about how large the earth was. And Columbus read this and paid attention. But Alfraganus used the words mile. Now, I understand now why people use kilometers. After going into this, that makes sense. Because the question is, how long is a mile? What makes a mile? How big is the world? Alfraganus wrote that the world was a certain size, and he said that there were 56.67 miles per degree of the earth. Okay, and that was different from 59.5. And Columbus knew this number, 59.5 miles per degree, and Alfraganus wrote that it was 56.6 miles per degree of longitude. So Columbus says, hey, it's actually shorter than what we thought it was. Well, no. See, this is the thing. Alfraganus wasn't using the Roman mile. He was using the he was using the Muslim mile. The Muslim mile is 7,091 feet. The Roman mile is 4,800 feet. Columbus took this and expanded on it. He took this number and instead of using it here, uses it here. And now the world is 25% smaller. Okay. He miscalculates the world's size as 16,000 nautical miles. A nautical mile is about three miles. 16,000 nautical miles instead of 21,600. Whoops. Math, right? Again, I can identify with him. So he thinks the world's so much smaller. He gets 100 men. He gets his 3 ships, and we all know that story, right? So he gets his 3 ships, and he is sailing under this flag, which is awfully similar to the Genoese flag as much as it is to the Spanish flag. 69 days out on the open ocean, 100 men and 3 ships. Okay, you know this part. He sails out in 1492, and he ends up reaching the New World. Right as they are, right in the first couple days of October, his men are angry because they're expecting to see land. They're not seeing land. The math was wrong. The men think that they should be seeing land. But of course, now again, going back to that thing of Sagre, Columbus studied at Sagre or studied in Portugal, but his men didn't. So Columbus knew these things, but wasn't sharing it with the other men on board the ship. If you were a sailor, you would be sailing blind unless you were the navigator. The navigator would know where you're going, but the sailors didn't. They just knew that they were getting hungry. They knew that they were running out of water. And so here's the thing. There was a promise. The promise was that if you spotted land, you would be paid 10,000 maravedis. 10,000 maravedis would be your year's wages. And you would be guaranteed your year's wages for life, for doing nothing, just if you are the one to find land. So on October 12th, 1492, Rodrigo de Triana, he is the one keeping the money. Rodrigo de Triana says he sees land. Columbus, in his journal, writes, he says he sees land, but I noticed a candle the night before. And Columbus said he didn't really find it, I did. And he claimed that money for himself. Do you see how this is going? This is where we're going with Columbus, right? So he claimed this money for himself, and the crown was offering it. Now, going back to the crown, okay, going back to the crown. So what is the deal? Why would Isabella give him this money? Why would they finance it? Well, this was the deal, that the crown was going to get their tenth. They were going to get paid off of all of the trade that would come back from this journey. But Columbus asked for his tenth. Columbus was going to be given 10% of all of the trade that would come from anything he discovered. Now he thinks he's going to China. And so he thinks he's going to come back with like pepper and spices and gold. And he thinks that there's going to be a great trade adventure, that anything after that 10% goes to him. Now, the other thing that he was promised is that he was promised the title of Admiral of the Sea, and that he would become a governor. So like he'd get title. That would be passed on to his kids. So we have this journey, October 12, 1492. Rodrigo de Triana, they find land at possibly San Salvador. We don't know exactly where it was because, again, Columbus kept his record secret. He did not record latitude and longitude because if somebody else found it, then they might know his secrets. And so you can't write it down, which he never does. San Salvador. Who's on San Salvador? The Taino people. The Taino people. A couple different names for them. A Native American group, tribe. They were very well off. They had lots of food. They lived in the Caribbean, so they didn't have to wear clothes because it's warm in the Caribbean. Like I said, there was lots of food. There was no reason for them to be fighting with each other because they were on this single island. They had no iron. And Columbus made note of this, that there's no iron here. And he was kind of confused because he was expecting to be landing in China. And he doesn't land in China. He finds these people. And he's like, who are they? Okay. He thinks that they are Indians, as in India, which is why he names them, that refers to them as Indians. They were extremely welcoming. They went out to him. They shared. They traded. Columbus says he traded trinkets. The Taino people traded whatever they had. However, the Taino people had one big mistake. The one big mistake they had is that several people were wearing gold earrings. Little itty bitty tiny gold earrings. And Columbus and his men see that as proof of gold. There is gold. And I was hoping that this would show up a little bit better. Columbus says, as soon as I arrived in the Indies, on the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts. Notice what happens here. As soon as he lands, the first people he encounters, he enslaves. Right from the beginning, as soon as I arrived, the first island which I found, I took some of the natives by force in order that they might learn and might give me information of whatever there is in these parts. He goes on to say, I saw some who had marks of wounds on their bodies and made signs to them to ask what it was. And they showed me that people of other islands which are near came there and wished to capture them, and they defended themselves. And I believe that people do come here from the mainland to take them as slaves. Here it is, slavery. Columbus is aware of slavery. Columbus knows about slavery. It's Genoa. That was going on, and he's thinking about slavery. How is he going to make money? Here is gold, and here are potential slaves. Holy crap. Right from the beginning. Columbus's journeys, he ends up taking four journeys. The blue one is his first one. They were on board the ship the entire time, pretty much, except for one experience. What they did, the Santa Maria ran aground. The Santa Maria was shipwrecked, and they decided to leave some of the men behind and build a fort out of the Santa Maria, which they do on Santo Domingo, what's today's Santo Domingo. So the map in blue is the first journey. The second voyage is in red, a very different route, and you can see thereon. Slavery, right? From the very beginning, he planned on taking 6 people into slavery. A sample. Let's see if they work as slaves. Like I said, he was used to Genoan slavery. He was used to chattel slavery, turning people into slaves. Making the 6 good servants. That was his idea. See, for him, he saw these servants, these people, as being able to imitate him, imitate the actions of his men. And so if they're able to imitate him, then that would make them good slaves, potentially. Or at least that was his reasoning. And so he comes back home, goes back to Spain. And on the arrival of Spain, it's like, hey, we found some gold and we found a source of slaves. And Ferdinand and Isabel are like, yes, here you go. You want to finance a journey? Let's go. Second voyage. Now, we all focus on that first voyage, 1492, but Columbus makes this big difference in the second voyage. That second voyage has 17 ships, has 1,200 men, has seeds, has horses, has sheep, has all sorts of stuff with them. They are prepared to go. And they're also prepared to take, because this second voyage focuses on slavery. They're not focusing on establishing a colony or bringing their families over or anything like that. It was about slavery. How many people can they capture? How many people can they force to work for them? Now, the idea wasn't for them to use them for anything else other than getting gold. So, focused on slavery. So the question to prompt tonight was, Columbus a sex slaver or sex trader? Well, yeah. We know the story of rape. Michel de Queno was his friend, his personal best friend, that he took with him on a second voyage. And this is what Michel de Queno said, what he wrote. He wrote, "While I was in the boat, I captured a very beautiful woman, whom the Lord Admiral," that's Columbus, "whom the Lord Admiral gave to me. When I had taken her to my cabin, she was naked, as was their custom. I was filled with a desire to take my pleasure with her and attempted to satisfy my desire. She was unwilling, and so treated me with her nails that I wished I had never begun. I then took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly, and she let forth such incredible screams that you would not have believed your ears. Eventually, we came to such terms, I assure you, that you would have thought she'd been brought up in a school for whores." Sex slavery. Columbus writes, he was willing to bring back as much gold as they need and as many slaves as they ask. That's what he said after the first journey. The second journey, he says, and he writes to his nurse, 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand, and for all ages a good price must be paid. Here is Columbus trading in 5th graders, right? We have to deal with our history. We have to fully understand this history. This is Columbus's words. This is not somebody else talking about Columbus. This is Columbus writing about it. And it's ugly. That second voyage, is dealing with this sex trade. That second voyage, it is difficult, because once we start talking about what this entailed, then it gets rough. See, those natives, he kept sailing around islands, and one of the groups of natives that he encountered were very friendly, and they gave him a golden mask. like mask made out of gold, not little dot earrings that were little pieces of gold. No, this is a golden mask. And now Columbus is like, all right, let's go. Let's park our ships and get that gold. Because in his mind, there is a source of gold somewhere. And he just needs to find that source of gold. And he will get it as easily as he can. So this golden mask is presented to Columbus by natives. Now he's sailing back to these other islands that he had once been to, including that first island where he had established the fort from the wreckage of the Santa Maria. And when he goes and finds the fort, he finds that the fort has been destroyed. The fort had been torn down. He found the destroyed fort. And when he finds that destroyed fort, he is furious. How dare these natives destroy this thing that we made? How dare they? And this changes his whole outlook permanently, changes his mission permanently. And so now Columbus institutes the tribute system. And he forces the natives, the people that he was near, to work for him. We're talking about slavery. Now, he doesn't force them to just like farm for him or things like this. And it's not just for him, it's for all of the Spanish who are there with him. He ordered all over the age of 14 to give a large quantity of gold each year. Everyone who was 14 years of age or older. And now, I've been thinking about this a lot the last couple of days, especially planning for this and talking about this. I was trying to figure out how much gold he was requiring. So like, what's a large quantity of gold? And I found it. The amount that he was requiring from each person, 14 years and older per year, was a thimble. A large quantity. And I'm thinking, that's not that large of a quantity of gold, right? It's a thimble. Then I got thinking again, all right, how would I go about trying to find a thimble worth of gold? I have my wedding ring on. That's not a thimble worth of gold, right? The going around picking up dirt, rocks, whatever, I couldn't find a thimble worth of gold. And if you didn't find a thimble worth of gold each year, you would get your hand cut off and you would bleed out because you didn't give the Spaniards a thimble full of gold. It's that thimble or death. Crazy. And if you achieved that thimble, you would be given a brass ring that you'd wear around your neck as a verification that you had achieved that, which also was a mark of shame for a Native American. Because here it is, this mark of shame that you went along with these Spanish slavers, that you fought for that thimble full of gold, right? Thimble's worth of gold. And this is this terrible thing that develops because he's so after that gold. He's so after that gold. He is willing to sacrifice pretty much everything or everyone for that gold. Possibly this was worse than slavery. Slavery meant life. This didn't. And so there was no other focus for Columbus than that gold. And the result of this is that demoralizes Native Americans. And later on, people go in the Spanish records, they say, there is so much great land here. We could be growing wheat. We could be growing all sorts of things here that's worth way more than the gold you were making them gather. But Columbus didn't do it. Columbus was willing to starve his men, starve the people to just get that gold. Demoralizes Native Americans. And Native Americans realize that death was their only escape. And 50,000 Native Americans killed themselves to get out of the requirements for this gold. You know, this is this crazy thing about Columbus. Yes, 1492, he discovers a new world. But holy crap, this is awful. Back to racism. So slavery and racism. Right? So how is this tied to racism? Well, immediately those Spaniards who come across in that second voyage start calling the Native Americans by a very distinct name. This is their term, Negros de Terra, blacks of the land. Racism, lumping everybody together, not about skin color, but about difference, racism. Right? And this racism that was seen by Portugal, and seen by Spain, referring to Africa and African slaves, was transferred to Native Americans. But it's not like nobody, so some people have said, well, Columbus was just a guy of his time. You can't judge him by our era. Well, yeah, you can judge him absolutely by his own time, because people knew that this was wrong, including Bartolome de las Casas. De las Casas, he arrives in the New World early in the 1500s, very early in the 1500s, and he records a horror of abuse. And there's lots of stuff that Bartolome de las Casas writes. However, in 1516, Bartolome de las Casas suggests bringing in Africans to replace Native Americans, because he was horrified that native slaves were dying. So you should just bring in African slaves, and gives these complete complaints of weak natives, and along with that racism suggests the superior strength of the Africans, that they can handle slavery, which is crazy. Because here's De las Casas, who in a lot of ways does a lot of good things to try and point out the problems of Spain, of the New World. However, De las Casas birthed racist twins that some Native Americans and Africans took in. The myth of the physically strong, beastly African, and the myth of the physically weak Native American who easily died from the strain of hard labor. Twin racist ideas, right? Twin racist ideas. So to get back to these original questions about racism and slavery. Racism and slavery together, they were foundational for Columbus. It wasn't like, oh, he just stumbled upon them. No, these were foundational for Columbus. When it came to his journeys or his governing, both of these ideas, when he was running the colonies, people didn't count. It was all about wealth. However he could get wealthy. And this is foundation. These foundational ideas are not just for Columbus. These foundational ideas are foundational, period. And in the history of the United States, we deal with 1619, right? You've heard of the 1619 Project. 1619 absolutely matters. But in a startling similar way, 1492 also matters in almost that exact same way. Because when it comes down to it, and to wrap this whole thing up, the New World, and hence the United States, was established on a structure of racism and slavery. The entire process, the entire thing came down to racism and slavery. Thank you. So, time for questions. Yes, sir.
I know you did those two comments, but of all the things you did, what was
Of all the things he did, what was the worst? Oh gosh. You know, I think the idea of the laws that he was trying to implement on the colonies that he was trying to establish, where it was all about that gold, I mean, that was pretty much as bad as it could seem. He actually got in trouble with the Spanish court because he started implementing, he had a restricted diet on everyone, and not just the Indians who he was working with or making work for him. He had the restricted diet on his own sailors, starvation diet, which was crazy because the Spanish came back in later on. There's a second journey of other Spanish to oversee this process, and they are shocked these other Spaniards come on and they say, what is all this food doing here? Why are you hoarding this food? You're actually letting it get rotten instead of feeding your men. This is a land of plenty and you're not giving it. So he was a bad dude. You know, I mean, he was out for himself, 100%. 100%. When there was a question that he was going to possibly, that he was mismanaging this colony, he actually sails back to Spain, appeals to Isabella and says, hey, please don't take my land from me. Please keep my title for me. I know I'm getting old. I know people are unhappy, but I need my stuff. And they actually make an accounting and they pay him out for his 10% of all of the trade for all those years. Then it gets passed to his sons, or his son and his other son and the variety of people connected to it.
So in your opinion, do you think Columbus Day should be abolished?
Do I think, I like having holidays, but should we celebrate him? You know, I didn't have that opinion until working on this. And I have a hard time justifying it after seeing this. Honestly, I did not have an opinion about Columbus Day being abolished. I mean, I thought about it a little bit, but I hadn't come to a conclusion. And after seeing this, man, I don't want to celebrate a guy who did this stuff. You know? Yeah, I don't want to celebrate a guy. I mean, yes, he introduces other things. They introduce smallpox, they introduce all sorts of disease, and there's a lot more to this, a lot of other reasons. However, this guy, he was a good sailor. Let's be clear. He was an amazing sailor. But that doesn't mean we should celebrate him, because he also was terrible in other ways.
It's like we should celebrate the discovery of America, but not necessarily praise him.
Right. Celebrating the discovery of America goes, okay, yes, now you have some foundation, right? And yet, praising the guy who did it, he's not a good guy at all. And that's maybe the complication of doing history. You can have somebody who is good at one thing and bad in other ways. And we get to make these decisions about what do we want to elevate, what do we want to recognize. And now, after looking at this, I don't want to recognize him. I don't think we should. Indigenous Peoples Day, maybe that's it. Keep the same holiday, flip it upside down. Let's talk about Indigenous Peoples Day, or something like that. Other questions?
I want to follow up on that. How do you reconcile the utility of the ideal versus the reality of what happened? So, for instance, Italian Americans used Christopher Columbus as a way to convince Americans to accept him as immigrants. And likewise, the Constitution has racist elements to it, but codifies the Declaration of Independence, which is an ideal that marginalized groups are able to use to obtain their franchising, for instance.
Right.
So how do we deal with the utility of the ideal versus the reality and the horror of reality and the need for understanding that?
Exactly. I mean, that's a great point. How do you deal with that? Negotiate mentally that ideal versus the real, right? I don't know. I don't know that there is an easy way to say that. I'm very comfortable in saying that I don't know the answer, right? I know that it's a struggle rather than here is an answer. I know that the way we don't do it is by passing laws about what we should and shouldn't study, or what we should and shouldn't talk about. I know that that's not the answer. I know that being willing to have hard discussions and to reconcile that ideal with the real is really important, even if it makes us uncomfortable. I think it's important to do. And recognizing that the Constitution has racist elements in it, and yet the Declaration of Independence has these ideals that we aspire to. And how do we negotiate the two? I don't know. But talking about it and recognizing the past so we can get to a different present, or a different future, I should say, helps.
When Franklin Roosevelt created Columbus Day, how aware in general was everybody of Columbus's history of the slavery and the sex trafficking, or were they not even aware at all?
Yeah, Columbus is, so when FDR passed it, I'm not sure. I do know that there was a text I was reading and working through that did, on Columbus, that did talk about how he used slavery. However, it recognized it, but it was also buried. So it was in the middle of this like 340 something page book, and it was in the middle of one paragraph that said Columbus practiced slavery. But it's there, but it wasn't explored, right? Because you don't want to, it didn't want to pay attention to it. Like, yeah, I don't want to focus on that, which is kind of tricky when it comes to being a historian. How much FDR knew? Not very much, I would guess. But I also don't think that it was really mattering to him as president. It was more, we need to pass this.
This is a comment, if I can don't mind me
Sure.
adding to that.
Yes.
But to that point, just as an example, so I did my graduate work at the University of Notre Dame, and there are some very problematic murals in the main building at Notre Dame that were painted in the 1890s that depict Columbus in a celebratory manner, so fitting into this sort of, elevating Columbus to help Italian Americans and Catholic Americans more generally feel more white. In those murals in the 1890s, there is obvious native slavery. Like there are Native Americans in chains being put onto ships and presented, and then you see them presented to Ferdinand and Isabel, those first 6 people. It is presented as a positive in those paintings, as the Christianization of these people is worth the slavery. So again, I don't know specifically about Roosevelt or more generally, but if this ended up in a painting that was a sort of like at a college, it's not unknown. So
Yeah.
Just
And since then, Notre Dame has decided to cover up their Columbus paintings
yes.
in the last, I don't know how long, but not very
After
recently.
a lot of complaints from a lot of students over many years.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, and that was the thing that was broadly understood, that slavery was justified as long as these people were exposed to Christianity. If they're exposed to Christianity, then you can justify anything. Or the Pope said it was okay, or whichever Christian leader said it was okay. And which was used throughout the rest of the colonial era. Other questions? Yes.
Okay, so in this room, we have a lot of like future educators and historians. For like talking about difficult histories and topics like, and that are controversial like Christopher Columbus, what's history like, how should we like present this history in the future? Or just like talking about like how the great things that he did for discovering like the Americas, failing not just him discovering America, but like also with his slavery involved.
Right. So that's a great question, right? And I was confronted with this today because I have kids, and my kids are like, "Where are you going to work tonight?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna give a talk on Columbus." And my daughter, who's a 5th grader, says, "Okay, so tell me about Columbus." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not telling you this stuff. I'm gonna tell you, let's say this to my daughter." I said, Columbus was not just a discoverer of America. He also was a bad dude. He had problems, right? He made some bad choices. And so allowing kids to know that there is 2 sides to people is okay. Instead of just saying, America's great, America's great, America's great. All of our history is positive, because that's not true, right? So what I suggest is thinking about age-appropriate discussions, right? Thinking about what would be age-appropriate. For my 10-year-old, my daughter, having age-appropriate discussions, I'm like, yeah, you're not going to watch this one on Facebook Live tonight, right? Because it's not age-appropriate. Should she watch it eventually? Probably, or understand this? Yeah, absolutely, but not at 10. See what I'm saying? And it's totally okay, especially for high schoolers, middle schoolers and high schoolers, to understand that there's a complicated history. I think that many of them can handle it. Not all of them, but many of them can. and knowing that there is more to the story is always good. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So I have two questions.
Okay.
The first one's kind of a short one. I wanted to ask, when we talked about the guy who, I don't remember his name, from Rico or something like that. He was the one who spotted the land.
Yes.
Well, you had said that Columbus took it for himself. How did they know that he was the one that did it? Was it written down somewhere else? Or
In Columbus's journal,
he wrote it down?
Columbus writes that Rodrigo says that he discovered land. And Columbus also writes, but I saw a candle or a flicker of light from the night before. Okay, yeah, you did. Fine. You're the boss on the journey, and you're gonna take it for yourself. So, yes, he wrote it out, and the subsequent journals, or the second journey and beyond, there are multiple accounts besides just Columbus's, but that first one is primarily Columbus.
And then my second question, I actually watched a video about Columbus. It was like this very magic school bus, but it was like the graphic version of Columbus or whatever. And they kind of posed this idea that the fact that even though it wasn't necessarily direct because of Americans, people from the U.S. saying that it was because of Italian immigrants and trying to make themselves look better than, whatever they want to put it as. They kind of posed this idea that the fact that Americans, or I should say people from the U.S., they try to go after parts of history that maybe aren't true or are a little kind of diluted in their ideologies and the way they think. They kind of ask, are Americans really painting the wrong history of their own country? What do you think about that?
Are Americans painting the wrong history of their own country? History is political. When it comes to lobbying for what to stand for or what to listen to, it does get to political. It does get to perception and what people want to advance or not advance. For the Knights of Columbus, they lobbied hard for this day to be recognized. And they lobbied government officials, right? Take them out to dinner, buy things, take them out to dinner, suggest bills, suggest laws. Let's keep up the pressure. And eventually things change. That's political pressure. Is that misremembering or claiming a history that isn't theirs? Well, maybe, but at the same time, that was the decision that was made to get the effect that they wanted, not for truth in history. That wasn't the focus. The focus was this recognition that they felt they needed, right? Is that right? That's a different question. Other questions? Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. I appreciate the discussion, and yeah, have a great night. Thanks.